Hey, welcome back to the channel. So today's video is extremely special because it's a video that I've wanted to make for the longest time and I'm finally getting the opportunity to do this. Let's not waste any time, let's get into it. So for the longest time within the camera industry, there's been a talk about what camera is more professional, a DSLR system or a mirrorless system. And I know a lot of you guys out there are really interested in creating your own content. I get a lot of DMs on Instagram. A lot of you all always hit me up and ask me what cameras I use and why I chose to buy a Canon M50, why I use a GoPro, and what system is actually good to get for your content creation process and your journey. Because a lot of you all want to get into vlogging, streaming, creating content, taking pictures of your family. So let me be perfectly honest. I'm no camera guru. I don't have a lot of experience with cameras, but I've been using cameras for about 2 years now. I got into cameras in 2019 when I picked up the iPhone 11 Pro. That's basically how all of this started, and now we're here 2 years later. And from that iPhone, I eventually shifted to GoPros, after which I got a GoPro Max, which was a 360 camera, so I started experimenting with that. And over time, I've actually moved on to picking up a mirrorless camera, which is the Canon M50, which I have right here in my hand right now. And over time, just like you guys, I had to do a lot of research to figure out what camera I should buy, which system is good, which brand is good, and whether I should go for a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, because there were a lot of people who had a lot of opinions about this. And today I'm going to break down the entire differences between DSLR and mirrorless and what you should get, also by relating my experiences to you guys so that it'll help you make an informed decision. So after months and months of research, after running all these rounds, I finally settled on a mirrorless camera. Quick disclaimer, I am on team mirrorless, but that being said, you should probably watch the rest of this video, because if you have a DSLR or if you can pick up a DSLR really cheap, there is no reason to shift, and you're going to learn why at the end of this video. Okay, here's a quick disclaimer. This video is not going to be scientific. Most tech specs stated are generalized to a wider range of models in the market, and there are exceptions in all cases. Certain features and drawbacks are present on both DSLR and mirrorless. This video is to state the overall market and explain these systems at a base level. So keep that in mind when you're watching this video. Okay, so the first thing that you need to know before you even make a decision whether you want a DSLR or a mirrorless camera is you need to understand the difference between the two cameras that we're talking about. I'm going to pull up an image from the Canon website. This image is not mine, but this is how I understood the difference between DSLR and mirrorless. I'm going to leave a link in description for the web page as well as the link and the entire article explaining, but I'm also going to break it down for you right here. The first thing you're going to see when I pull up this image is a DSLR on the left and a mirrorless camera on the right hand side. So DSLRs and mirrorless cameras are basically the same cameras with different tech on the inside. When you look at a DSLR, you're going to be able to see the different parts and components that are on the inside of the camera. So you have the main mirror, the autofocus sensor, image sensor, after which you have the lens of the camera. Along the length of the lens, this is known as the lens barrel. The lenses are interchangeable, you have to keep that in mind. You also have the prismatic mirror, the auto exposure sensor, and the optical viewfinder or the eyepiece, which is what we always use. So now that you guys have already seen the construction of a DSLR camera, well, let's see how it actually operates. I only have a mirrorless camera, and that's exactly what I'm using to demonstrate this, because I don't own a DSLR, but I'm going to explain the entire system to you. On a DSLR camera, you have an eyepiece. This eyepiece is known as an optical viewfinder. When you look through the optical viewfinder, you're actually going to be able to see what the lens is seeing. And this is basically because, as you guys have already seen, a DSLR camera has a bunch of mirrors, and it has a periscope mirror system built on the inside. So when you look through the optical viewfinder and you point your lens at something, you're basically going to see the light enters your lens. From the lens, it passes through the lens barrel. As you guys already saw in the construction, there's a mirror in front of your DSLR camera sensor. It's going to hit this mirror. This mirror is going to reflect that light upwards towards the prismatic mirror system that's built right in front of your viewfinder. Now that mirror system is going to reflect the light towards the optical viewfinder and to your eye. And that's basically what I mean by you see what the lens sees. Now keep in mind, when you put your DSLR to your eye and you hit the shutter button, you're going to have a moment where everything blacks out. And that's basically because the mirror in front of your camera sensor is going to lift, and then the light that's passing through your lens barrel is basically going to pass straight. It's not going to hit the mirror, it's going to hit your camera sensor, and the camera is going to record an image. Now this is what you call blackout. You have millisecond of blackout every time you shoot on a DSLR camera. As you hit the shutter button and the mirror lifts up, there's no more light that's being reflected to the optical viewfinder on top. All the light is going into your camera sensor. Now a lot of times when you take a picture on a DSLR camera, when you put it to your eye and you take a picture, you're going to look down at your your screen and you're going to see that the picture is very, very different. This is basically because when you're shooting on a DSLR camera, you don't get to see what image your camera is producing. Only thing that you get to see is what image is transmitted through your lens. The exposure settings that you dial into your DSLR camera are not visible in the optical viewfinder, and you can only see that after you click an image and you look at the back LCD screen. This is exactly why you see a lot of DSLR shooters dial in their settings, put the camera to their eye, frame up their shot, take an image, look down, pull back and look at their back screen. A lot of mirrorless camera users also do this, but most DSLR users have to do this. That's basically because you do not get to see in real time what your camera is basically capturing. Instead, the real image with the exposure dialed in will only be on your back screen. The optical viewfinder is mainly used for framing on a DSLR camera and not for dialing down your exposure. And that's also why you have a difference between what you see on the optical viewfinder and the back LCD screen on your DSLR camera. As you can see, the mirrorless camera is a lot smaller than a DSLR. You have an image sensor, you have the shutter unit, you have a lens on this camera as well, which is interchangeable, and along the length of the lens, this is also known as the lens barrel, similar to a DSLR. Other than that, you have an electronic viewfinder as the eyepiece and not an optical viewfinder. Mirrorless cameras work in a completely different way. As you guys already saw in the construction of a mirrorless camera, there aren't any mirrors in front of your sensor. Also on a mirrorless camera, the viewfinder is not an optical viewfinder, it's an electronic viewfinder. What I'm basically saying is it's an LCD screen, a really small one that's inside this. When you basically point your camera at something, the light is going to travel from your lens down the lens barrel, go directly onto your image sensor inside the camera, after which the image sensor is going to produce a digital readout and send it up to the small LCD screen which is at your eye. And that's what you call an electronic viewfinder system, and that's exactly how a mirrorless camera works. Also, another thing that you have to keep in mind with respect to mirrorless cameras is when you dial in your exposure settings on this camera, you put it to your eye, you dial in your settings, you take a picture. When you look at your back LCD screen, what you saw in your electronic viewfinder and what you see on your back LCD screen is going to be identical. And this is basically because you can dial in your exposure settings in real time, and you don't only see what your lens is seeing, you actually see what your image sensor inside the camera is seeing, because there are no mirrors here. It's a direct readout. The light passes through here, passes through your sensor, and then comes up to your eye. And that basically happens because there is no mirror to lift. The light is already passing through your sensor to your eye. Everything's changing in real time. You don't need to shoot, bring it down, check the exposure, readjust, shoot again. You basically put it to your eye, adjust the exposure, shoot, and you have your shot ready. So you guys already saw these camera systems operate very differently, but what's the image quality difference? Honestly, there's practically none. You're not going to be able to make out the difference. There are certain times where a mirrorless will just perform better, and there are certain times DSLR will perform better, but that has nothing to do with the operating systems of the camera. It comes down to the sensor size and other technical details which we're not covering in this video. Let's go back to the basics for a little bit. DSLR cameras have been in the industry for a very, very long time. Famous DSLRs that were used that pretty much broke YouTube were the Canon 70D, the Canon 80D, the 5D series by Canon, and also a certain Nikon DSLRs. Canon and Nikon basically ruled the DSLR market, and a lot of you guys who watch YouTube vlogs probably know who Casey Neistat is. He pretty much broke the YouTube algorithm using a 70D or an 80D. So these are the famous DSLRs that basically rule the world for the longest time. Now mirrorless cameras on the other hand are basically the newer versions of DSLR and give it the same image quality, have similar construction but lack those mirrors on the inside. Mirrorless cameras that people are using right now are the ones by Sony, the Sony a7 III being one of those amazing mirrorless cameras that everyone has raved about for years. There's also the Sony a6000 series. Canon's coming out with mirrorless. Fujifilm's mirrorless cameras are fantastic. There's a lot of mirrorless cameras that you're going to see on YouTube, and a lot of professionals have shifted over from DSLR to mirrorless. Look at Fuji and Sony because they're pretty much market leaders. Canon and Nikon are also out with their mirrorless systems, but they still have a little bit of catching up to do. Now, next major difference that you need to know about these systems is DSLR cameras are a lot bigger than mirrorless, and that's pretty obvious. You guys already saw the construction. There's a bunch of mirrors plus an image sensor plus a whole bunch of electronic tech into these camera bodies, so obviously they have to be a lot bigger. Mirrorless just doesn't have all those mirrors, so that automatically makes the camera a lot more compact. This is a pro and a con. DSLRs being bigger, a lot more grippier and a lot more ergonomic to use, so it's a better, more robust feel in your hand when you're shooting with the DSLR, and this also makes them a lot more rugged. Mirrorless cameras are smaller. The grip isn't as great as what you would have on a DSLR camera, even though a lot of manufacturers are now coming out with more ergonomic mirrorless cameras. DSLRs just feel really different. But then again, the bigger size also brings the drawback of traveling around with DSLR camera, and as time progresses, things are getting smaller. People want more compact systems. People want tools that are easier to carry around. So especially if you're a travel photographer or a wedding photographer, to lug around a DSLR camera will just make your entire camera bag a lot bigger. It's not that you cannot do it, but if when you have smaller options, you would probably want to go for that, and mirrorless are just easier to travel and lug around everywhere you go. Now, something that's become a staple with most mirrorless cameras nowadays is IBIS. Now, if you don't know what IBIS is in-body image stabilization. Basically, you have a sensor inside your camera. This sensor is now now mounted on a spring-loaded system. The sensor is put onto a spring, and the spring will keep balancing the sensor to keep it straight at all times. How this is going to help you in your photography and videography is that the spring-loaded sensor that you have inside your mirrorless camera is going to reduce all the shake, all the movement that your camera has, and give you a stable image, giving you much smoother video, giving you cleaner and sharper images when you reduce your shutter speed, because it removes the micro jitters that you have when you're shooting with your camera. Now, this was not a staple for DSLR cameras. When DSLRs came out, they did have some kind of electronic stabilization. Electronic stabilization wasn't as great as what you have on smaller action cameras. So overall, you do have in-body censorship image stabilization on a mirrorless camera. You also have lens-based stabilization, which is available on both DSLR and mirrorless systems. But having IBIS within your sensor and lens-based stabilization is going to give you a lot better footage and a lot sharper images, which is available on mirrorless, as compared to only having lens-based stabilization along with digital stabilization, which is what you have on a DSLR. Now, according to me, a mirrorless camera is very similar to your phone, where basically you have a small camera, you have no mirrors on either of them, you have electronic viewfinders. Your phone's viewfinder is your screen, you have an electronic viewfinder here on top, digital screen in the back, and you can change your settings in real time and actually see your settings change when you're shooting an image. So overall, mirrorless cameras are better versions of your smartphone with a bigger sensor and interchangeable lenses, producing much better image quality than these little devices. When it comes to video recording, mirrorless have always stood out. When you shoot a photo on the DSLR, the mirror in front of your sensor is going to lift up and let your camera create an image. And when you're shooting video, this mirror has to lift up and stay in that position for a prolonged period of time so that it can have continuous feed, keep composing all those frames into a video. Most DSLR cameras have record limits when it comes to shooting video. They have a maximum of 15 minutes or 30 minutes depending on what brand, what size of camera, how powerful the camera is. And this is basically a limitation that most DSLRs had, and a lot of them still have it even today. But mirrorless cameras, since they have no mirror system, they can basically just hit the video record button and you can start shooting video almost instantly. Most of the mirrorless cameras have no record limit, but you've got to remember smaller mirrorless cameras may still have a record limit. That's just because they're smaller bodies, so when you shoot a large amount of video, you're going to heat up the camera, the processor, and you need time for the camera to cool off. On the overall, most mirrorless cameras have longer video record time than DSLR cameras do. Okay, so now that we've looked at the construction of a mirrorless camera and a DSLR camera, we've looked at how these systems operate, we've looked at a couple of differences that these systems have. It's about time we get to the main part of this video, which is what camera system you should buy in 2021, whether you should go for DSLR or you should go for mirrorless. If you ask me my honest opinion, I'm going to say go for a mirrorless camera. This is not because I think mirrorless cameras are better than DSLR cameras. No, they're not. These camera systems are almost the same when it comes to performance. They're fantastic. It doesn't matter on that front. It's just that mirrorless cameras are a bit more advanced than DSLR cameras, just by a little bit, and they're also a bit more convenient considering the size of the camera as well as the lenses become smaller as you go for mirrorless. Now, don't get me wrong, there's no harm in buying a DSLR camera even today. These cameras are extremely robust, they're very powerful, they're not going to fault you with image quality. They have a huge selection of camera bodies available in the market because they've been around for almost a decade. That brings me to their lenses. The lens selection is definitely bigger than what you have on mirrorless cameras, but you have to keep in mind why I'm telling you to go for mirrorless, and that's basically because you're going to be future-proof. Remember, the camera companies like Canon and Nikon that led the DSLR market have now shifted over to mirrorless, as well as Sony being the leader of mirrorless cameras and Fujifilm next in line. Most of the big manufacturers have shifted to producing mirrorless cameras, mirrorless camera lenses, and accessories for these cameras. They have all shifted their direction away from DSLRs, accepting the new technology. And it's basically as simple as that. It's as simple as having an iPhone 8 and shifting to an iPhone 12 Pro Max. The longevity of a 12 Pro Max, if you buy it today, is going to be a lot more than buying an iPhone 8 in 2021. You can choose what you want. Think about going the mirrorless way because this is the market for consumer, prosumer, and professional in the future. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned a little bit of a difference between DSLR cameras and mirrorless cameras today. I also hope this video will help you make an informed decision about what camera you should buy now or even in the near future. If you want to know anything more about the maritime world, cameras, tech, or games, I am right here for you guys. You can find it right here on this channel. Just hit me up in the comment section, DM me on Instagram. I'm always available and I would love to make a video for you guys. This is Nitin Chawla. This was another episode on my channel. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Peace.